All right, I would like to welcome everyone. Thank you for taking the time to step into our seventh session of the learning community. I'd like to just give a thanks to Detroit Justice Center, the Michigan Roundtable for Diversity and Inclusion, Emergent Justice, and Friends of Restorative Justice, along with Michigan Collaborative to End Mass Incarceration. Everyone coming together to be able to have these learning communities that began late last summer. We're just so grateful for these opportunities that we have to come together. Today, of course, the welcome and introductions have already started. The agenda, we've got two great speakers today. What we're going to do is we're going to give them an opportunity for them to talk about their organization, what they do with power building. And then after that, what we're going to do is we're going to break up into small groups so that the community will be able to come together and not only get more information from the speakers, but also build community with one another in the small breakout rooms. Of course, our community agreements is in the chat. And here they are here. Respect others, bring your authentic self, be present, engage as needed. Be flexible, flow as we need. This isn't a set schedule, so let it flow. Let those let that information come out normally. Be open-minded and respect different opinions. We all come from different backgrounds, different spaces, so this is an opportunity for us to learn from one another. And the only way we can do that is be mindful and open. Step up, step back. If you're one that normally is the spotlight, man, maybe take a step back today. And someone who normally doesn't speak up, we love to hear your voice. Respect the mic, one speaker at a time. And if anything else someone would like to add, please do so in the chat at this time. Next slide. All right, so today we're connecting and sharing with each other. We have Kamau Jawara from We the People and Nicholas Buckingham from Michigan Liberation. And today's discussion is going to be on power building. I'd like to take this time to introduce our first speaker, Nicholas Buckingham. Is a disciplined Detroit organizer, co-founder, and the campaign director for Michigan Liberation. In 2019, Nicholas created the Michigan Black Mamas Bailout, formerly Incarcerated Justice Impacted Led, rotating community bail fund for Black mothers incarcerated in Wayne, Macomb, and Oakland County jails due to lack of bail funds. In 2020, Nicholas developed a multi-county prosecutor accountability campaign challenging long-standing prosecutorial disparities in habits. By leading a coalition of local and national organizations, he successfully helped flip 2 county prosecutors for progressives, skyrocketing civic engagement. Nicholas received his master's in social work in 2022 as a proud graduate. Hail to the victors, University of Michigan. All right, Nick, take it away, Nick.
That's what's up. What up, there, everybody? Appreciate the warm intro. Just kind of got me in my gut and laughing a little bit. But shout out to all the social workers. There's other social workers on the line. I just learned that somebody that's been 50 years in the game is on this call. So that's what's up. But yeah, as Tori stated, my name is Nicholas Buckingham. I use the pronouns he, him. I am the co-founder and co-executive director of Michigan Liberation. And I'm actually going to share my screen. I have a few slides that I want to share with folks today. And all right, look at that. I didn't lose touch of how to run these things. And yeah, today really want to just kick it with you all about building power. I think this is the right opportunity to start talking about what is power, why is power such an important thing, how do we wield power, how do we influence power. And yeah, how is Michigan liberation, advancing in power and making sure that we're building power on a long strategic run and not just on a short moment to moment. So before we get into all of that, just want to give a little bit of background about myself. I started to organize when I'm formerly incarcerated, so I spent close to a decade incarcerated here in Michigan for a crime that not only impacted my life, but come to the understanding that it impacted the lives of the innocent victims that I decided to take my rage out on. And while going into the prison system, a system that is told that it is there to rehabilitate the criminalistic mindset and so much more. During my time of incarceration, it was literally just being locked up inside of a cage. A lot of the resources for that development for us to come out to be productive and successful citizens were stripped away from us. And it was initially the incarcerated folks that were leading the work and leading the charge to actually rehabilitate each other, not the system. But during this time, while I was incarcerated, I started to organize with a group of folks around the cost of the phone calls in prison. If anybody know, those costs can cost you up to $25 for 15 minutes. If we're really talking about rehabilitation, that connection to family, having that support, having that connection to your children can actually bring you closer to being productive and successful. And I participated in a 8-month protest where we stopped using the phones. We cost the system a lot of money. And initially they came back and was able to drop the cost of the phone calls down to a more affordable rate. And just from there, I came home in 2012. I knew that I wanted to do something productive in my community, just not sure what it was because I knew that the felony stigma was real. I was introduced to this mainstream organizing by a lady. Her name is Elder Leslie, and she currently works for Michigan United. And when she pulled me in, she asked me this one question: are you building power? And I didn't know how to answer that question. I used to always look at the term power as only corrupted politicians will talk about power, but nobody in my community will. And she started to lead me into a week-long training around leadership development, connected me with other organizations that was building power in the community, and started to push me off of that ledge to build the power that I wanted to build to make a significant change here in Michigan. So in 2018, myself and 3 other folks, we co-founded Michigan Liberation. We're a statewide 501c4. We're a network of organizations of directly impacted and formerly incarcerated folks, community members, and also victims and survivors of harm and violence coming together to talk about what are the ways that we want to see our criminal justice system here in the Michigan operate. And ultimately, because we do our work through a lens of abolition, we believe that we can see a world where we're not being over policed, over criminalized, and that we can end mass incarceration of Black and brown bodies. In 2019, I joined a coalition of Black mamas across the country that was looking at the statistics, the alarming number of Black women this number was growing within our county jails. And that initiative led us to push the national bailout. And in Michigan, I was able to create the Michigan Black Mamas Bailout. And during that year, I think 2019, we was able to raise close to $35,000 to $40,000 to go into 3 different counties from Wayne, Oakland, and Kalamazoo, and roughly bail out between 25 to 30 Black moms. And when you hear these stories about bail and how it impacts people, I often say that when we incarcerate a Black man, it disrupts the household, but when we incarcerate a Black woman, it disrupts our community. And many of these women, many of these moms that were locked up in our county jails, that had bonds and fines as low as literally $100. These moms was losing their jobs, losing government benefits, and so much more, even their children, right? For traffic violations, for small petty thefts out of grocery stores, for Pampers, right? For Similac milk to give to their children. So we've been able to go into the courtrooms and the jails and start to bail out a lot of these folks. It just so happened we continue with this bail fund throughout 2020 and actually about to get ready and launch our 2024 Michigan Black Mother's Day bailout. So anybody's down to get down with us. Lastly, in 2020, as Tori spoke about, this is one of I call it my baby, one of my favorite campaigns, in which I'll talk about power a little bit more within this campaign, but was able to develop a multi-county prosecutor accountability campaign, looking at Washtenaw, Oakland County, Macomb County, and Wayne County, and challenging the prosecutors that have been sitting in the positions of power for over decades, but also have been instrumental to the mass incarceration of Black and brown bodies here in Michigan. And through that campaign was successfully able to flip 2 counties. And when we talk about these flipping of 2 counties, it's what comes after that, right? Like the work should not die when the campaign is over with. So when we look at the things that are happening in Washtenaw County with the decriminalization of certain substance use, they're even pulling back on some of their bail, the usage of bail. When we look at Oakland County, Karen McDonald was able to establish a conviction, a criminal integrity conviction unit, right, where we're looking at people that are wrongfully convicted within our jails. But that campaign also puts the pressure on our county prosecutor here in Wayne County. And we put up a huge fight to have somebody else reelected in Wayne County. But however, we came significantly short of that win. But knowing that we have over 30% of the population that is voting for a different prosecutor, a different look of how we want to run our criminal justice system, and the ending of mass incarceration of Black and brown bodies, it let us know that we have power here in Wayne County to make a significant change. So I want to just talk a little bit about what is power, why is it important, and how does Michigan Liberation build power? And I'm really thankful to come into this conversation right now. We're actually kicking off a series of day-long trainings throughout the year, where we're taking folks from our base, from our community. We're taking leaders and organizers and giving them the tools in the toolkit to effectively go into their communities, to organize, to build power, to build the power to make the change that they want to see. And ultimately, when we talk about building power and Michigan Liberation, we like to keep it real simple, right? And we if I had time, I would ask folks, like, how do you try to perceive power? How would you try to identify power? But in Webster's definition of power, it's simply the ability to act, the ability to make a difference. And when we're looking at that definition, we come with 2 ingredients of what does it mean to actually build power? What do you need to actually have the ability to act and the ability to make a difference? And one of those ingredients is organized people, right? Organized people that are operating through a self-interest, and a shared identity within their community of the things that they're impacted by and what they want to make change in. So with organized people, we got to meet people where they are, building the relationships that is needed to have within our communities, and build these relationships around a shared interest in each other and things that we really care about. The second ingredient that we like to share in Michigan Liberation is that with building power, along with organized people, there's organized money, right? Like, I know a lot of activists, a lot of organizers can really believe like we can do this work, we can make all of the change in the world without money. I'm here to say, like, that's kind of false. When we look at a lot of the power builders in this country, right, money is the one thing that is leading them. And we can look at, from corporations like GM, Ford, Walmart. That's organized people, that's organized money. We can look down to politicians. I'm pretty sure that we're all getting the text messages right now and the emails that is coming from Act Blue that's asking for folks to donate that $5 to $10 so that they can have their strategic long run of building power or corrupting power in this country. But we like to identify organized money. This is the word that takes money. It takes resources. It takes long-term strategic resources. So I talked about that in the moment, and also building a long-term agenda, a long runway of like, how are we looking at the state of Michigan from now until 2034. I remember joining Just Leadership USA for a training, and one of the things that they used to say was that they wanted to cut the prison population in half by 2030, right? And that was almost 7 years when I joined that, when I did that training, and just thinking of that on the long run, what would it take for us to actually cut that prison population in half by 2030, which is coming up on us very shortly, like in 6 years, right? And so, we're seeing it in Michigan. We're seeing a lot of us that are formerly incarcerated directly impacted, a lot of allies that are coming together, but it's also going to take the organizing of the resources and the money to really build that power. We have got to figure out how to fund ourselves, right? Fund ourselves well for the long term so that we never have to use being broke as an excuse for not winning and not building power. And, I wanted to put emphasis on not being broke, right? Because I hear a lot of times from many organizers across this ecosystem that they can't do the work that they really want to do because of the lack of resources, because of the lack of funding. And when I started this, right, talked about the prison system, snatching away those resources, snatching away those fundings for folks to be, rehabilitating a way to be productive in their community. Well, that same attitude happens within our community, right? Like if we're not aggressive enough and effective enough to go out and raise money, if we're afraid to raise money, if we're afraid to talk to our constituents and our donors about pulling money in, then we're just going to be organized ourselves and we're going to be powerless while we're in the world being controlled and folks are being taken harmed of. So why is it important? Why is building power important for me? Why is building power important for Michigan Liberation, for the base that we organize? As I mentioned, the two sources is organized people and organized money. Without power, without building power within our community, we would not be able to end mass incarceration. And that, like, my focus, like my self-interest is to end the mass incarceration of Black and brown bodies here in Michigan. And I know what it's going to take. I can't do it myself. I can't be the lone wolf. The ending of mass incarceration is not going to come just by the hands of formerly incarcerated folks. It's not going to come from a group of lobbyists. It's not going to come from one or two politicians that's champion the criminal justice reform work, but a collective within the community, all of us coming together on a shared self-interest and saying, yo, the issues around our criminal legal system, the issues around mass incarceration really needs to be changed. And together across the state, we can show a powerful hand. Often I use this statistic. I'm not sure if this is even a statistic that's reliable today, but about 5 years ago, there was a study that came out that said roughly between 5 to 7,000 folks are returning home every single year. And that's just to the city of Detroit. And when we think about that number of people that are coming out of our prison systems, both state, the federal, and our county jails, with a felony stigma that's hanging over their head, these are folks that are having a difficult time with housing, employment, government assistance. Together, if we was to use our voice, we will be one of the most powerful voting blocks in the state of Michigan and can really make significant changes. When we talk about power, it's not complicated, right? Power in the public arena means to have a vision for the way and the way that you want the world to operate. And I said earlier, through Michigan Liberation, we organize through a lens of abolition. And so, I know a lot of folks, when they hear abolition, it's like, we just want to shut down the prisons and let everybody out, and it's just going to be crime and violence and everybody running. No, no, no. Like, that's a myth. There's many, many, many abolitionists out here in this world. Abolition has been a thing for many centuries, right? And for myself, I believe that abolition starts with healing first, right? Talking about what is our collective and individual healing before we actually go into the work. But I do believe that we can see a world where our bodies, our personalities, our identities are not over criminalized, it's not over policed. I went to prison with almost 35 to 37,000 folks. And when I say to take a person and lock them up in a hostile environment and expect for them to come out as a sane human being, right? That's just beyond that's I don't know. It doesn't happen that way. Just take it from me. It does not happen that way. And in my courses in social work, I often would say, imagine taking a war vet that is experiencing PTSD and placing them right back into a warlike condition and telling them to fix the internal things that they're going through. And that's for many of us that go into a prison system, that we're snatched away from our families, our homes, and our communities, and we're placed into these hostile conditions and treated almost less as animals, less than animals, right? Many of us that have experienced MDOC, in some of our food, it will say these are our rations for this live feed for farm animals. And even being locked in a cage or having to spend, for myself, more than 24 hours in solitary confinement, that's enough for you to kind of like lose your mind. And these are the people that, are coming back into our community without the resources and without the proper help. So we talk about power. Another reason why I would say it's important is that there are powerful actors that are taking up a lot of space in our public arena. We see them right now. Like, we're in a huge election year, 2024, the Dems, the Republicans. We can name two people right now that are taking up extreme amount of space. And, a question that I often ask is, why do we focus so much on what's happening in DC when there's a lot of things that we need to be focusing on right here on the local level, and moving our powerful actors to make a change? But a lot of these folks are taking up the space. The problem is that the average person is not organizing people and money, so we're not taking up the space in the public arena. And most of us, and it's not a shot at anybody, but a lot of us in our community, we might see these things, we might experience the harms and the illegitimate ways of our politicians, but we talk about it and not showing up to make a change, right? We're not showing up in our communities. We're not knocking on each other, on our neighbors' doors. We're not making phone calls to our friends and our neighbors. We're not trying to pull people into house parties to start to have that conversation of collectively what is it that we can do to raise our voice to start to make a change within our community. So what is it that Michigan Liberation do to build power? As I want to move this over because I can, let me. So yeah, Michigan Liberation, as I stated earlier, when we developed the organization, we made a conscious choice to do it through a lens of a 501c4, also developing a super PAC, because we understood that, as much as we can get out there and advocate about the things that we see happening within our legal system, a real change is going to come through a political lens. So moving our local candidates, moving our local politicians to hear our voices and to really stand up to make that change with us. We have a deep focus on power players of mass incarceration. So we're always going to run strategic campaigns that's going to focus on our prosecutors, that's going to focus on our judges, on our Supreme Courts, on our county commissioners. We want to go after the power players that have their hands over the jail system, over the court system, and over the prison systems. Lastly, and I think I have a slide for this, but in 2019, we spent about 6 months going across the state from community to community, working with directly impacted folks, formerly incarcerated folks, so many people. But we created a vision for a liberated Michigan, which is an agenda, a statewide agenda that actually guides our work for the next 10 years. And within that, I'm gonna show a slide of that, but that work is what is the structure. Like, want to end cash bail, and from ending cash bail, we want to bring in a care not criminalization, the care for folks that are suffering from substance abuse should not be locked away, right? Like, they should be given proper help. And this agenda is what's really leading a lot of our campaigns. We also focus on leadership development, and one thing that we believe as organizers is that we're in Michigan Liberation, a lot of our work come from our community. Those who are on staff have little to zero say of like how campaigns are developed, how campaign messaging will go. We like to take that from our community. We like to meet people right there on the doors where they're at, have those conversations, bring them into our core team meetings, bring them into our base meetings, and ask them those questions of, have you ever been impacted? Have you ever been, in contact with the police? Do you know who your local prosecutor is? And from there, from those listening sessions, allowing our folks to really develop what the campaigns will look like for Michigan Liberation. So, how do we retain the support staff? As I mentioned, I don't think I mentioned this, but Michigan Liberation over the years, we have grown. I want to say right now we're up to about 17 full-time staff members. The majority are organizers. We have two campaigns that we're leading. One is our In Cash Bail campaign, and another is a cure, not criminalization. But how do we retain this? How do we bring folks in and keep them engaged into building power and want to organize? As I mentioned earlier, leadership development, everybody in the organization, no matter what the role is, if you're working admin, if you are HR, if you're the janitor, right, you're going to go through some form of leadership development. You're going to participate in our day longs. We're going to find opportunities for you to participate in week long with other organizations, partnering organizations across the country. And our ideal is that everybody in the organization must organize. If you are HR, hey, there's HR folks that's out there that can be organized. If there's admin folks that needs to be organized. The same thing with comms, right? The really cool thing with, and I'm not going to like expose too much about this alignment table, but both myself and Kamau, we sit at a alignment table that has roughly between 10 to 12 organizations, and we're building out a 10-year strategic plan of building power here in the state of Michigan, right? And for us, it's getting everybody in our organization involved in this alignment table. Another thing that we try to do is I do, we do, you do. So as a long-term organizer, I do not believe in just coming into a community or group of folks and just telling them, hey, you got to find a self-interest, find an issue to cut, and then you go out there and organize. I would not tell anybody to organize on something that I'm not willing to organize on. So I try to lead the pack first. And as I'm leading the pack, this is giving an opportunity for a person to learn what it is that we're doing. It gives them the opportunity to also join in and kind of like take the crutches of organizing before we say, hey, it's on you to go out there and start to build your base. We believe in building a collective community. As I said, the staff of Michigan Liberation, little to zero input, or we're going to actually put on campaigns. Our job as organizers to get out there and organize the resources for our leaders to be productive in their work of building power and getting the change. Also the work, so our work is based on self-interest. And I think this is a really big key thing that is missing in our ecosystem. A lot of us, especially formerly incarcerated folks, we come out, we get into the organizations, it's a job, we see the microphones, we see the cameras, but oftentimes it's not in our self-interest on the campaigns that we're leading. And so when coming into the base of Michigan Liberation, we really want to lead off with, like, is this in your self-interest? I don't want a person that's working on ending cash bail to run that campaign if they don't have an interest in ending cash bail. If they just showing up to say, hey, this is my 9 to 5, this is my paycheck. I get that. We all need money. We all need jobs to live in this world, but that's not going to get us to building the collective power that we need. The last thing is that we must be willing to build power in the public arena, right? Like, this can't be forced on us. We're not going to force you come into Michigan Liberation Base or a core team. We're not going to force a campaign on you. You have to be willing, right, to actually say, this is in my self-interest to do. I want to build power to make the significant changes here in Michigan. All right. So how is power building sustainable? I spoke about this earlier with our statewide agenda. I'm sorry that I didn't blow this up so that you all can see the different points within the agenda, but you can see kind of like the titles of each one over a course of like 6 to 8 months, just going from county, about 4 or 5 different counties, having so many different meetings with so many different folks. We've come up with this agenda that's going to guide our work after coming out of a prosecutor accountability campaign. You know, after we got the 2 wins and the 2 losses, it's like, what is next? And from those campaigns, we learned so much other than just holding prosecutors accountable. We learned that we need freedom for our children to thrive. You know, just yesterday there was an amazing, immaculate hearing about second look. You know, a couple folks, Chuck, went out, did their thing, right? A right to a second chance, rebuilding life after incarceration. We
Hey,
learned,
I'm sorry, Nick. I'm cutting in. We're pushing on it. We're pushing on a time, and
okay,
as much as I hate, man, I am I'm listening. I know the people are, but we definitely want to have a lot of more time for you to be able to discuss this in the small groups. You'll be able to actually everyone has access to these slides here that you have up,
yeah,
and we'll be able to continue this discussion in the small groups. But one thing I want to say, I want to end it because you've really answered a lot of questions. I love it. We had this discussion to all the folks a week ago and said, hey, you know, these are the questions, Nick. You nailed every single one. But I like something you said, and I really like for the people to think about this in the small groups. You said power is not complicated. It's not complicated, and power in the public arena means to have a vision for the way you want the world to operate and have the ability to make it. And I want people to think about that as it not being complicated, but just how tough it is to build, right? And so just to think about that in the small groups, Nick, man, I appreciate your time. I was so caught up in what you're saying. I'm like looking at this time, like I'm running behind. I'm running behind.
yeah.
And I wish I could give you more, but we're gonna get more in the small group. So, Nicholas, thank you very much. I really appreciate it, and look forward to the small group discussion that we have.
Yep. Yeah. No,
Our,
thank you.
you're welcome. Our next speaker, Kamau Jawara, Southeast Michigan lead organizer at We the People Michigan. Kamau is a political cultural organizer for Detroit's East Side with passions for community and storytelling. Kamau uses political education and cultural strategy to support concentrations of energy justice, leadership development, and co-governance in order to build semi-ASIC, our unified dream of organized residents of Southeast Michigan. We must be persistently curious and care for each other. This is to say, movement must start with developing the power and solidarity as Black Detroiters. Kamau, take it away.
Yeah, I'm actually kind of tickled a bit because I think I sent you the more visionary bio as opposed to the more logistical. I was born blah, 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 and did but I love it. I love to kind of come into this space with that. I got some slides. So I'll probably screen share, and I'll try to kind of work with the time that we have so that like I don't go over. But one, like to just like introduce you all to myself. You heard my bio, of course. Like I'm from Detroit, a native son of Detroit. And I am Southeast Michigan lead organizer at We the People Michigan, which is a statewide org where we're focused on how do we build multiracial working class power. And so how do we, of course, work with residents to develop their ability to build out local winnable campaigns anchored in long-term goals that resolve a better Michigan for everyone. That's kind of the broad just idea of what we do. I'm a big reader, and also I love illustrating, so you just have to bear with some of like my artsy side before we get into the nuts and bolts. But two readings that I find especially helpful for some things that, of course, Nick as well as I are talking about that really are great for me are Conversations, which is an excerpt from Emergent Strategies by Adrienne Marie Brown, and then also To Let This Radicalize You by Kelly E. Hayes and Miriam Kaba. Those are two works that I anchor a lot of my organizing in. That really bridge to the mission of our organization and what we do. So one, to just talk about the org, some things that we, of course, worked on in the past, like I'm seeing some love for Adrienne Marie Brown in the chat, so that's great. Some campaigns that we've worked on in the past, we were actually founded about 7 years ago in the spirit of building multiracial working class power following the emergency management, where, of course, like our executive director, Art Reyes, he always talks about it. He did this cross-state tour, talking to folk, having one-to-ones, and really understanding how do we kind of respond to some of these divisive narratives that have been said about different regions. When we think of the Upper Peninsula, we often think of it as being another place, or we think of Native populations often they lack visibility. And so we're not actually seeing how some of the same issues that impact us around incarceration are impacting them as well. So how do we start having some of those regional conversations, and also too building out local campaigns where people are able to build their power and then long-term negotiate that power with each other to get even more. So some things that we've worked on in the past, myself, my bio said it, I work a lot around the energy sovereignty space. So how do we, of course, resolve a better energy grid? So we, of course, worked with a statewide coalition to resist a rate hike in 2022. It was the very first time we actually earned a hearing to push on a rate hike in the history of us having DT as our power provider. Also, of course, worked with, it's great to be here with Michigan Liberation because we worked together in 2022 at the city level of actually shifting $7 million in ARPA funds to go towards an Office of Violence Prevention as opposed to gun detection surveillance technology. Some other things more broadly, we, of course, last year, our big win was we freed up $114 million in school debt for school districts impacted by emergency management, and that was with other partner orgs within Alignment Table and abroad. Specifically, a large chunk of that going to Benton Harbor, where one of our organizers has been working for a few years now. And then we've also done some work developing the leadership of undocumented leaders here in the state, where we really anchor the campaign that is working to get driver's licenses for undocumented folk. So of course they were successful in flipping a House district in 2022 where undocumented leaders who can't, engage electorally, they can't vote. They actually knew it was important for them to be talking to voters, having conversations, and mobilizing people to vote on their behalf. And that is where, of course, Betsy Kofia was elected to office. Is a lot of the work that they were doing, talking to voters just of their own volition of look, this is what is important to us. How do we, of course, build out that path towards a better Michigan and a better political landscape for us to organize in? Beyond that, of course, we've done work in the UP, so Alger County as well as Marquette, Waters Meet, and we're also kind of building out this long-term, what does membership look like for our organization as we, of course, continue to develop our leaders. So that's some of what we work on. I always love to show our little logos for our campaigns because they're super cute. I love them. I enjoy them. But this is all to say that we're statewide. Fresh Start is in Benton Harbor. Wasamoan is in the Upper Peninsula. People's Power Program is the campaign I started down here. And then we also have a statewide rent control campaign, as well as the of course, Drive Michigan Forward campaign. So shout out our logos. So to kind of get to some of the nuts and bolts outside of context, for us, it looks very similar. And when we're talking about power, it's not this static, very complex, hard to understand thing. It's not a quality, it's not a trait, it's just the relationship between interest and resources. So a lot of what we think about when we think about power is we think within the context of power theory of how many people are needed to influence a decision maker or to influence a law or a bill. And that's often what power looks like. It's thinking about what resources do people have, what is their interest, how can those things be in communication with each other to get what we want. So we start with just bare bones questions of who even are our people, who are our constituency, as we like to say. So if you're organizing around, hey, we're organizing around folk who are on low income plans. You can't organize that if you're not talking to folk who are on low income plans for energy bills, right? You have to actually go and speak to people who are impacted directly, and then be thinking about, okay, what is their understanding of their bill, the laws, yada, yada. How do we train them up? How do we develop them to be able to even wrestle with the questions of how they can change their community? So understanding their problem is really being able to talk to folk who are most impacted. And then, of course, how can they use their resources? Often when we think about resources, we tend to think about these really broad things of oh, this person doesn't have this or they don't have that. Often people have feet, they got hands, they got time, they got a living room, they got a basement. All of these things are resources that we're often working with. With our driver's license campaign, a lot of the work that they've done of building a base of 400, 500 folk statewide really started in what we call house meetings or house parties, where undocumented folk came together They cooked food. They talked about, you know, the legislature. They educated folk who had not engaged politically, and like, what is like, how do politics work at the state level, and what do we have to do to get driver's licenses back? So often when we're thinking about resources, they're those things. They're people's abilities, their skills, their gifts, their time, and how, of course, can those be in communication with each other to get what we want. So some things that we do in practice as an organization is one, like developing community leadership. We think of like house meetings as an immediate way to do that. Workshops where we're able to spend 3 days or spend a week with folk and unpack like what is calling you to this work, what's your experience, how do you build power, how do you have conversations with your neighbors, and how do you build strategic campaigns from those conversations and from those meetings. We think about, of course, movement schools and core teams where we develop strategic teams that are impacted folk that are able to anchor the strategy. So we're not deciding what we're going to do in a closed room and then going out to people and saying, hey, here's the strategy. It's already cooked. Good luck. It's actually inviting those people in to say, based on what you know of your community, what you know of your lawmakers, and what you understand about your neighbors, how do you build out a strategy that makes sense and is actually winnable and movable to give you the momentum for broader fights? And so often what we think about when we think about community leadership is that those folks need to be centered in the decision making, and they need to be a part and co-conspirators with us on the decision making. It also means kind of what I said before, building local winnable campaigns that are nested in long-term fights. And so I think Nick said a really great point on this. Like, what we don't want is we don't want kind of these temporary campaigns that come and go, and then there isn't really much connectivity after them. When we think about our political arena, this is especially relevant right now as it's an election year. Folk are kind of used to hearing from people every 4 years and then not hearing from them again. And so when we think about how we build out campaigns and how we build out leadership development, we actually need to be winning local fights that are grounded in something long term. So when we think about driver's licenses, that is a first step for immigrant rights and immigrant justice. There are other things that they're thinking about beyond that peak, but they're organizing to get there so that they can go and get more. And so, of course, the last two is just like engaging in the political arena. I think it's super important for us to like be understanding that, yes, we need to build our own local context, local power, but we also do need to engage electorally. When we think of federal, we think of state, we think of local, there's a lot of money, time, and resources that are being moved around, and they're often not being invested in our people. And so we need to develop their ability to make reads on that, to understand lawmakers as folk that can be moved, not static. And how do we strategize around that? How to move them in our favor to where we can get what we want and what we need. And then lastly, it's just maintaining a learning environment. For us, a big thing that we try to do is we try to make it okay for you to mess up or for you to learn. A lot of the organizing work is like what I tend to call is like you have a hunch, you test it. Once you test that hunch, you're clear on whether you were right or whether you weren't. And so often it kind of looks like the scientific theory. If we do this thing, it will have this outcome, and then you test it. What that does is that creates a learning environment for our leaders as well. Often when we think about folk who are impacted, they come into our orgs with like all of collective trauma, with the imposter syndrome of, hey, strategy feels really difficult, power feels really difficult. And so what we often want is we want them to be able to learn and want them to know that like learning is a part of this work. What that builds, of course, campaigns. So of course, like when we think of campaigns, like the way that we're building these out is we're talking to folk, we're building relationships, and based on what folk are raising as their needs, that's how we build out, of course, local winnable campaigns that are anchored in a long-term fight. And I always just like to give this little XY chart just because it provides a context for what it means to actually build a campaign over time. You're building capacity, so you're developing more leaders over time, as well as more resources. Once you, of course, build those, you're able to take bigger swings because you have more people, more resources. So just kind of answer the question, one of our kind of guiding prompts around this is like, what is the piece of advice that you would give, of course, folk that are building power within the state is, I think the biggest thing is accepting that there are contradictions and that contradictions are not places for rupture or for us to like throw our hands up and say like, organizing is not worth it. Often some contradictions we run into is we run into like breadth versus depth. So do we have a broad scope? Do we be everywhere? Or do we be deeply rooted in a specific community with a specific constituency? We run into the contradiction of is this a moment where we should resist a decision that someone else is making? Should we be mobilizing versus should we be developing leaders, developing shared strategy? And then also too, what we like to call playing offense. And it also leads to the, contradiction of issues versus people. We sometimes come into this work with a thing that we really care about and we're an expert on. And sometimes that's not necessarily what the people are asking you to organize around. So it's actually listening to people and understanding what they actually need and then helping them, of course, go get it. These are all normal things that we run into, just internal tensions in this work. And they're normal, they're human. And so I guess the biggest advice I give is that a lot of this work doesn't always look like this perfect thing that always seamlessly runs. There are never hard moments or there's never conflict. A lot of that conflict is actually good. When we have leaders that are coming to us and saying, hey, I feel that we should make a pivot in this particular way because I'm talking to folk and my folk feel that we need to talk to this lawmaker because they're actually more strategic to talk. Those are things where you, of course, entertain that conflict in those conversations because they allow you to move forward and they allow you to understand better who you're relating to and who you're building power with. Okay, I think I'm just got 5 minutes left. So just some things in regards to how do we, of course, retain folk and what does community support look like? Big pieces that I think are relevant when we think about retention is understanding self-interest. We kind of talked about this in the last one, so I'm not going to do a whole deep dive on self-interest. But often what this looks like is the maintenance. A relationship is something that you are continuously nurturing. And so having one-to-ones with your folks, resetting, providing mutual feedback. So when we're thinking about what feels challenging, what feels difficult, those are things that we share and exchange. And then also to testing our hunches together. So if we have a theory or a thing that we believe is true, we test it through action and through organizing. But also means coaching each other, developing our ability to hold each other accountable, as well as our community's ability to do that with their folks. And then also to anchoring in the multiracial working class power. And so we've been pretty good at retaining, of course, our staff. We have about a little over 40 folk on staff at We the People Michigan. But really the big aspect of how we retain folk and as well as leaders is continuously providing opportunities for leadership development. We're now at the point where membership is now becoming a conversation that we're having very thoughtfully because there are leaders now that are saying, hey, we want this to be an official political home. How do we build out that process to where they, of course, share co-governance with us? We also think of workshops, cross-team trainings, lobby days. So creating continuous opportunities for people to learn about themselves, about the political arena, and about how they relate to each other. We, of course, last year did our very first kind of cross-org lobby day where all of these different campaigns were able to share a room and have, of course, Spanish translation, Native folk, white folk, Black folk, Arab folk, they were all in one room together and able to actually talk about what they're moving together politically. And that lends to kind of the last aspect of retention is creating new environments for folk. For me, I'm 26 years old, so I'm pretty young, I'm pretty vibrant, but this weekend was the first weekend that I actually spent time in the Upper Peninsula and supporting the organizing training of folk and thinking about how those opportunities are actually things that our leaders need. A lot of folk have not seen Lansing before or have not seen different regions and seen different perspectives. And so as much as we can, creating a learning environment where people are able to better understand the political arena, it actually increases their curiosity to say, now that we've won this local thing, how do we link up with this other base that is actually also organizing a similar thing? Those conversations happen by getting folk thoughtfully into containers together. and helping them understand, of course, why their fights are linked. And so I just would say like the last aspect of this is like what makes this sustainable is like three things. Like one, like very specific and concrete goals that are anchored in people, that are like actionable, that are winnable. It also means building capacity. So developing leadership over time, developing resources over time. And lastly, it looks like learning. Maintaining a learning environment is how we know we're organizing. Whether it's a new lesson about a lawmaker, whether it's a new lesson about your community and what's possible, those are things that all lend to sustaining this work to where folk don't feel that, that feeling that we feel when we're mobilized to a very short-term fight and there isn't a road after it. I'll kind of wrap up with just like a short quote that one of our organizers, Lupita, shared very recently in one of our like internal, like in our retreat at the beginning of the year. She was talking about how they had flipped all the votes they needed in the legislature, the state legislature, to pass driver's licenses last year through lobbying, through House meetings, through town halls. And that bill didn't pass. It didn't make it to the floor because it was actually held up. And someone asked like Lupita, like, well, how do you talk to your leaders when you lost? And she responded, she said, we actually didn't lose because we understood that all of these folk that we had developed over this past year, they now have momentum, they now have interest in going and getting what driver's license is. They actually didn't lose because they developed all of these folk, and now these folk are invested in going and developing others. And so when we think about, of course, success in organizing, it's those three things. So I'll kind of pause for time because I know that we want to get to breakouts. I'll leave this corny joke that I typed up one day just as like a way to kind of wrap before we go to breakout rooms. But other than that, I'll actually pass back to you, pass back to facilitation.
Oh man, Kamau, thank you so much. And as I listen to what you say about we didn't lose, I was actually having this conversation with someone on a call in regards to second look legislation, and like, man, what's going to happen if it doesn't pass? We're going to lose. And this is from someone that was incarcerated. I said, it's still incarcerated. I said, man, it's not a loss. Everything that's been built up, everything that's been happening is a win. Man, we're getting folks together. We're getting people on the same page. So I really love that. So as we get ready to wrap up and go to the small groups, I like people to think about, I like what you said about testing theories, right? How do we get from theory to practice, right? So, as you get into small groups in regards to power, how do we get from theory to practice? How does that happen? Just as folks, I know people have questions and they'll be able to ask that in the small breakout rooms. So think about that. But thank you very much for Kamau. That was great. Shout out to the slides, man. Everyone was talking about the slides in the chat. I wish I was that creative, man. When I need some creativity, I'm coming to you. I'm going to pass it over to Chuck. We're going to do a quick poll prior to going to the breakout rooms.
All right. Hello, everyone. Just a quick feedback. So want your feedback rather, as we designed this learning community, the goals we had for the learning community are up on the screen: to build a supportive community, share resources, align strategies and tactics, and connect local level experience with state policy discussions. And the way we've been doing that is we've had these presentations like you've just heard, amazing presentations from Nick, Kamau, and the other ones we've had, a little bit of small group time afterward. And then on the off months, it's just been small group. We've just been able to get together on a 1-hour call to connect. And our planning team, and shout out to the planning team who are on the call, and some folks couldn't make it today, but from Detroit Justice Center, Emergent Justice, Friends of Restorative Justice, and Michigan Roundtable for Diversity and Inclusion. One of the questions we had for you all is, how are we doing on this building that community, those person-to-person connections? And would it work better if on those off months, like next month, rather than just having an hour for that small group time, if we bumped that up to an hour and a half? So I'm just going to I just dropped a quick survey. And if the survey doesn't open for you, you can put it in the chat or just shout it out. But we'd just love your thoughts on, should we bump that every other month up time to an hour and a half, or should we keep it at an hour? And if you're somebody who's going to be there or not be there, regardless, depending on the time, you can just check either you'll be there either way, or just sit this one out. We're just going to keep this open for a couple more minutes. And as folks fill out that survey, just to let you know what's coming up next, in a moment, we're going to open up the small groups. And you can join a small group session either with Kamau or with Nick. We're going to be on there. It says, oops, that time is wrong. We're going to be in this until 1:25, not 12:45, until 1:25. You know, normal small group stuff. It looks like we've got a majority here. We've got 9 folks saying yes and 2 folks saying no. And then a bunch of folks are either going to be there, not there either way. So thank you for that. Once you get into those small groups, please do take a moment to introduce yourselves. The speakers will be there, facilitators will be in there. We've got some prompts that might help help your conversation. I'm going to open up the rooms, and you should see an opportunity to choose your own breakout room. If you don't see that pop up on the bottom right of your screen, if you're on a desktop, there should be 3 little dots that'll let you choose your breakout room. If not, if you don't see that pop up, just either shout it out or drop it in the chat, and we will send you to where you want to go. So if you're not seeing that, either drop it in the chat or shout it out, and we'll start putting you where you want to go. Liz, where should we send you? Oh, she's got set up. John, is there somewhere you want us to send you?
Either place that's
Okay, sure thing.
either one.
Anybody else have a request? Otherwise, I'm just going to start sending people and dividing it up among the rooms, keep them balanced.
Hey, this is Brandon Gleaton speaking. Any room is fine for balance.
All right. Thanks, Brandon. Appreciate that. And I really appreciate you saying your name too, so I could keep track of that. All right. Well, I'm going to just start sending people to the breakout rooms, and Joy will be in until 1:25. Tori, where did you want to go?
Let's go. You know what? I want to hear more what Nick has to say.
All right.